Stones Crying Out, Fulfilling Bible Prophecy by Gertrude Garrow. Narrated by Simon Garrow. Chapter 1. The Origin of the Bible. The Bible is not one book, but a collection of 66 books. The Roman Catholic Church includes the Apocrypha, ancient writings thought to be of Greek origin, written between 200 BC and AD 400. These bring the total number of books to 73. The Bible is divided into two sections. The Old Testament was written between 1200 and 165 BC, and the New Testament written between AD 50 and AD 100. The Old Testament is largely a history of the Hebrew people and the relationship between them and their God. It gives an account of creation, the Noahic flood, Abraham's calling by God to leave Ur of the Chaldeans to travel to a new land, his family becoming a tribe, and then a nation who were enslaved in Egypt. It also contains the story of Exodus and the 10 Commandments being given to Moses on Mount Sinai. Joshua's leading of the freed slaves into Canaan and his partitioning the land among the 12 Israelite tribes, and the promise of a Messiah. The Old Testament scriptures are based on the 24 books of the Hebrew Tanakh. These consist of the Torah, or the Mosaic book of the law, the prophets, and the writings. The Israelites had priests, judges, kings, and prophets. The role of the priests was to act as witnesses of the one true God. The judges were military leaders in times of crisis. The kings were seen as mediators of the covenant between God and his people, and the prophets spoke what they heard directly from God's Holy Spirit. God said, "Do not let this book of the law depart from your mouth. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous and have good success." The Old Testament also contains descriptions of their religious practices, sacrifices, ceremonies, laws, and customs. To the Hebrew people, God had promised his protection and abundant blessings in return for their obedience to his laws. But their history tells of the persistent disobedience, resulting in disaster, their repenting and coming again into God's blessing. For many years the scriptures had been lost, but in the 18th year of the reign of King Josiah of Judah, the high priest Hilkiah, during the restoration of the temple in Jerusalem, found a scroll containing the book of the law. The king had it read to the people, and they returned to obeying God's laws. In 538 BC, the Jews were released from their 70 years of captivity in Babylon. The book of the law was read to the people by Ezra the scribe. Ezra read in a loud voice from the book of the law, from early morning until noon. He was facing the open place that was in front of the water gate, and he read to all the men and women and everyone old enough to listen and understand. All the people listened carefully and paid attention to the contents in the book of the law. Nehemiah 8, verse 3. Nehemiah the governor, and Ezra the priest and scribe, and the Levites said to the people, "This day is holy to the Lord your God. Do not mourn or weep," for all the people were weeping when they heard of the word of the law. And they celebrated the 7 days, and on the 8th day there was a festive assembly. Nehemiah 8, verse 9. Who wrote the Bible? The Bible was written in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek by over 40 different authors, ranging from shepherd to king. Moses was from Pharaoh's court. Joshua was a general. Samuel was a priest. David was a shepherd and king. Solomon was a king. Esther was a queen. Amos was a herdsman. Ezra was a scribe. Nehemiah was a royal cupbearer. Isaiah was a prophet. Daniel was a politician. Matthew was a tax collector. Luke was a physician and historian. Paul was a rabbi and tent maker. Peter was a fisherman. Few of the authors of the books of the Bible knew each other, but the uniformity of their writings has to be supernatural. The books that constitute the Bible were written on 3 continents, Asia, Africa, and Europe. And the topics include history, philosophy, theology, prophecy, romance, biography, poetry, and travel. The Old Testament contains 39 books. 17 are historical, 5 poetic, 17 prophetic. The historical books tell of the founding, the history of the Jewish nation. The Pentateuch, the first 5 books, is often called the 5 books of Moses, or the Book of the Law. These books are Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Genesis tells the story of creation and the beginning of life on earth. It also contains the accounts of Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, Noah and the flood, the Tower of Babel, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. Exodus gives an account of the escape of the Israelites from slavery in Egypt and contains the 10 commandments that were given by God to Moses on Mount Sinai. In the book of Leviticus, God establishes the moral laws that were to set Israel apart from other nations. The book of Numbers gives a detailed account of the Israelites before their occupation of Canaan, the promised land. It describes their sufferings and their numerous complaints against God. The book of Deuteronomy focuses on the love relationship of the Lord to his chosen people, and that of the people to the Lord as their sovereign God. It is a call to a total commitment to God in worship and obedience. The historical books are Joshua, Judges, Ruth, Samuel, Kings 1 and 2, Chronicles 1 and 2, Ezra, and Nehemiah. The poetic books are Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and the Song of Songs. The 150 Psalms were written mainly by King David. These are poems and songs of praise and thankfulness to God that contain themes about hope, sorrow, faith, and trust in God. King Solomon wrote the majority of the Proverbs, which were collected into a book centuries later by King Hezekiah. The prophetic books warn the children of Israel to keep God's laws, or they would be punished. They also foretell the first coming of their Messiah, who, as the suffering servant, would save the people from their sins, and his second coming as a glorious king. The major prophets were Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel. The 12 minor prophets were Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi.